When God decided to make life, when life was created from Source, Source created countless points of life and put the totality of Creator Source into every one of these points of life that were made manifest from Source. These points of life are what we call the higher self. Each one contains the totality of God, not a part, but the totality. Let us now make a huge jump and get to the point where oversouls and archangels exist. Our oversoul, yours and mine, decided to make you and me. So the oversoul sent out a message to the archangels, the directors of life, and it's helpful sometimes to think of archangels and angels and oversouls as really nothing but conscious energy. So higher, closer to Source energy forms, directors of life. So the oversoul decided to make you, me. A message was sent to the archangels, the directors of life, and requested a point of life. The archangels took a point of life, a higher self, and imbued it with a force that made it a human. It was then passed to our oversoul. The oversoul created you. Over time, you came down through the realms to the point where you were going to be born. By now, you had chosen your family, country, skin color, and you developed your personality. At some point, you were given something we call the ego. You needed this because you were going to be born on Earth and needed a protective armor. The ego is that protective armor. It is a shield that is placed within and around you to help you in this fight or flight world in which we live. Ego can be equated with the reptilian brain in that part of our brain physiology. Unfortunately, this ego gives everybody a sense that this is the real person. When you talk about you, it is your ego talking. You feel separate from everyone else. You feel the need to defend yourself from an invading force that is trying to harm you. That is the job of the ego. It is because of ego that we have the horrible world that we see and which you investigate. But this ego is not you. You are the point of life, the higher self that was taken and turned into you. This point of life is God Himself. However, you can't have both operating and controlling you. You either let your ego run your life or you let your higher self control your life. In your case, and in the case of most people, the ego is in total control. And so the higher self takes a back seat and waits for the day when you decide to reduce your ego and allow Him to take control. Your higher self is patient, very patient. Through meditation, it is possible to reduce the ego and allow the higher self to take control. Now, you may have noticed that I spoke of you allowing ego or higher self to take control as if you were neither of these things, but something else. You would be quite correct. There is another aspect of you that you may never have heard of, although we have discussed this. There is something called an id, I-D, id. We're getting into deep waters here because the id, there is only one of. Everybody who has lived, is living, will live, has the same id. That is because we are all one. This id is the totality of God. So you have the totality of God in you as an individual, and there is the totality of God in a global sense. You can't get much more God than that. The point is that the way that you feel now is because your ego is running the show. It is possible to allow the higher self to take over, which is actually you as an individual. And eventually you can progress to the point where you realize your oneness with all life. And then the id takes over. Bit complicated, I know, but that is the truth. You're not your ego battling to defend itself against opposing forces. You're your higher self until the moment when you can make the leap of realizing we are all one. Then it is the id that runs the show. Ego, higher self, id. Namaste. Namaskaram.